Hi everyone, Coach Tiffany here. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about intuitive eating in general and how to get started. I'm going to be focusing more and more on intuitive eating, and in the future you'll probably see me come out with some courses on intuitive eating. Right now the way to work with me is one-on-one in my fall cohort. That's my current group, and I'm going to be talking about that, I think, next week. I'll invite you all what that cohort looks like. What does a cohort even mean? And what type of support is included in that group? But, if you're curious about that, definitely reach out to me. And if you're on my email list, you would have received some information about it in there as well. And you can always, of course, go on my website, coachtiffanyrn.com. And there's information about my fall cohort on there. So, but in the meantime, I'm going to talk a little bit about intuitive eating, because the work that I do around food and our relationship with food is based on the intuitive eating model. And I think it's really important to differentiate that between dieting and this type of work around food. There's a big, big difference. So so let's see here. Intuitive eating. So the difference in intuitive eating between intuitive eating and the standard kind of diet culture mentality we have around food is there's a really big difference. So the standard dieting culture is around controlling your intake of food so that you are the weight that you want to be, right? Or eating really restrictively because certain foods are bad and other foods are good. And so there's this kind of, so you might hear the word healthism, right? There's this idea that we should always be striving for optimal health, and that is equated to being thin, which, there's plenty of people who are thin that are not in optimal health, and there's plenty of people who have larger size bodies that are optimally healthy, so or that are as well as possible, right? So there's really not the idea that our body size has anything to do with our health or how well we're nourishing ourselves is a myth, right? So, and it's actually harmful. It's harmful in our society. I'm sorry, I really didn't I didn't plan on getting into the health at any size idea and talking about body image, but it's tied closely to why intuitive eating is beneficial and important. So the standard model is, we eat in a way that is restrictive, either low fat or low carbs, or we cut out bad foods such as gluten, right? And we don't necessarily pay attention to what is optimal for us. So it's often one size fits all. So I heard about this diet and my friend did good on it, so I'm going to do it too because I want to lose weight. So that's kind of the standard process that happens, or because I want to be healthy. So intuitive eating, the model of intuitive eating takes the locus of control from external, so from the shoulds, right, like what we should be eating, to an internal locus of control where we can decide what works for us. Now, deciding that in our head versus listening to our body are two very different things. So that's where somebody hopped on. Hello, I'm not sure who's on, but it's good to have you on here. If you're watching, just say hello. Let me know where you're watching from, and if any feedback you have, I'd love to hear feedback. So back to the intuitive eating model. So it's an internal locus of control. It's listening to our body's signals, getting acquainted with and reconnected to our body, and letting go of judgment, using kind of a growth mindset and experimental mindset around learning what does and doesn't work for us. And that's how we determine what we want to eat. And we include things like pleasure, right? And we include things like body satisfaction, taste bud satisfaction. We include what foods make us feel well. Sometimes we eat food just for the fun of it and just for the pleasure and satisfaction of it. So they're very different. So I'm hoping I'm kind of giving you an idea of what these two models look like. So I'm actually there's so much happening at my house right now. This always happens. I get on live and like my phone starts freaking out and I'm getting messages and things are happening outside, like amazing birds come to visit me. Anyway, everyone must know that I'm engaged and connected and talking about the things that I love, and that just attracts them to me, right? Unfortunately, I get a little distracted. So back to the topic at hand. So intuitive eating is much more, what we're finding is that it's a much more realistic way of working toward health. It's also a much gentler, more loving, kind way, and it's much more honoring of the autonomy of the individual. So for me personally, the reason that I do intuitive eating is because what I was finding out there was a lot of shoulds and a lot of restriction, whether it was for my, to lose weight, which I've let go of trying to eat to lose weight. But when I shifted into eating for health, I found that too was really restricted and a lot of shoulds and not a lot of focus on what works for me and my body. That has now developed into wanting to spread the word about this because I feel that especially women we aren't raised to or encouraged to listen to our bodies and our intuitions and trust our bodies and trust ourselves. We're also taught that pleasure is bad and that we don't deserve pleasure. We shouldn't enjoy ourselves. And these are all things that undermine our trust in ourselves and our autonomy. So, if you want to look at this on a larger scale, I feel that taking back our autonomy and trusting in ourselves is a way to be empowered. So I want to help empower other women. I also am so sad when I see how many, when I have conversations with people and I see how many people are obsessing about food or worrying about it all the time or struggling with it and trying to, control it, and then beating themselves up and feeling bad about it. Because that's so much like wasted mental and emotional energy. And I know how painful that can feel from personal experience. So I want to help empower women to have to heal their relationship with food so that they can have more freedom and they can free up that mental and emotional energy to really live their magic in the world. So that's a little bit about what the differences are between intuitive eating and kind of the current diet culture or the weight focused, the norm of like focusing on weight and good and bad and shoulds around food, kind of fear mongering around food versus intuitive eating, which uses our own body to gauge what we want and what works for us. So that's that. And then a little bit about why I do this work and how it applies for me personally, and then on a larger scale in the work that I do and why I'm passionate about it, right? Oh, how do we do it? So the main thing that I experience when I'm introducing someone to this is that it feels a little out of control because there aren't those hard and fast rules, right? There's no shoulds. So it feels like, there's no structure, right? It feels kind of nebulous. Like, how do I do this? And it feels uncomfortable for people. So intuitive eating doesn't mean just eat whatever you want. It does mean giving yourself permission to eat, an unconditional permission to eat. So that means, especially if you're hungry, eating and eating food, all food, whatever food. But for each person, it looks different. And so that's where intuitive eating really becomes exercising a muscle. So practicing self-care with food. So if you think about self-care in general, sometimes self-care is taking a bath, right? Like you had a really rough day, you need to take a bath, you need something warm, you need something soothing, you need to feel comfort, right? Sometimes self-care is working out, right? So kind of equating this to like a bowl of stew versus a salad, right? Or whatever. I heard a great analogy on one of the trading videos that I was recently listening to. That was if you equate it to like going to school, right? Like if you went to school 24/7, only went home to sleep, what would that look like? You wouldn't have any fun, right? But I mean, you get super smart, but you wouldn't have any fun. And eventually you might be like, I'm done. I'm quitting school, right? Like I'm exhausted. This is stressful and tiring. If you just played all day and didn't do any work or go to school or anything, you would have fun, but you may not feel great. You might not feel very fulfilled. You might feel like you don't have a lot of purpose. You might feel, you might not gain a lot of knowledge or the things that you want in your life. So the balance is really the goal. So you want to be, do purposeful work or go to school or go to work, whatever it is. Some of the time you want to build up those muscles. Those are important. And then some of the time you want to play and be a little more relaxed and have some fun, right? And sometimes we go on vacation. So for a lot of people, we settle into kind of an 80-20, where 80% of the time you're eating really helpful, or I shouldn't say helpful, nutrient dense foods that are, minimally processed, and so a lot of veggies, right? That kind of stuff. And then 20% of the time you're eating, foods that, maybe just like white rice, or you're eating, some crackers or some treats or whatever it is. So you can kind of have that rough structure if you need some structure. But really it's about allowing yourself to experience foods that have been off limits and not judging yourself about it and seeing what happens. So sometimes people end up eating in a way that feels a little out of control at first. If you have not allowed yourself to have ice cream for a year or something like that, you're probably going to eat a lot of ice cream. And sometimes with clients, we'll put certain foods on their like never restricted list, right? Like you can have that if you want it anytime. And eventually, a lot of times it'll kind of lose its power as long as we are not trying to control it, right? And then other times it looks like eating more and more and more of the foods that are more nutrient dense and kind of crowding out some of the other foods, right? So let's say, you start eating 1 cup of vegetables a day, and then you decide, okay, I'm gonna eat 2 cups, and then you get up to like 5 cups of vegetables a day. Well, if you're eating 5 cups of vegetables a day, you're probably gonna feel pretty great, even if you're still eating some tortilla chips or whatever it is. And you're not gonna necessarily want that stuff as much. So ultimately the goal is to get to a more balanced place for most people, right? Most people want to have balance in their relationship with food, and they want to feel good. So that's kind of where that eating more nutrient dense foods most of the time comes in, and then having the play foods so that you're not feeling restricted and so that you're enjoying food and having satisfaction and pleasure with food. But the initial steps are always a little bit challenging for people. So here's my recommendation. So going out from today, I would say really look at when are you judging yourself around food, and examine those thoughts, whether those are really accurate. So you might be like, oh, I just ate that whole bag of potato chips. I'm a pig, right? So is that thought accurate? Well, if you ate the whole bag of potato chips, that's accurate. But being a pig, is that really accurate? Or is that just shaming and harmful, right? And would you say that to someone else? And then what are some other things that you can do? Well, examining, instead of judging, examining like what was happening leading up to that. So, oh gosh, I had a stressful day, so I was stressed out. So probably your cortisol level was up, and that can contribute to, craving carbohydrates. You may have not had time to eat proper meals, so you might actually be really hungry. You may have gotten to the point of being over hungry, which can then make your messages to yourself, like, your hunger signals more and more intense, right? So you're going to eat with a little more intensity, and you may end up overeating. What else might have happened that day? Well, you may not have had a dinner planned, or maybe the dinner you had planned was a lot of work or didn't sound very satisfying, right? So path of least resistance, especially on a stressful day, is going to be grabbing the thing that's already ready, the potato chips, right? Maybe you just really, really like potato chips, or maybe you haven't allowed yourself to have them in a while, and you're just like, forget it, I'm going to let myself eat them. You may be low on sodium, right? You may not have gotten enough calories in today. So there's a lot of factors to it. And so I would say the very first steps in learning to eat intuitively are, letting go of judgment, examining those thoughts, and also, looking at things with a curiosity and an experimental mindset. What is it that is kind of leading up to a circumstance where I eat in a way that I would feel bad about, or I would feel um, shame around, right? And then even looking at other days, like what are the circumstances around the days where I feel good? Oh, well, gosh, I ate, protein and veggie rich breakfast, and it had plenty of healthy fat. Like maybe you ate a scramble with veggies and some breakfast sausage, and that had some avocado on it, right? Like that's going to be really satisfying. It's going to be, your satiety is going to be increased because of the healthy fats in there. So maybe you ate that and you started feeling really good, and it lasted you to lunch. And then at lunch, maybe you had, I don't know, salad with some chicken and some really delicious dressing. And that was pretty satisfying, but maybe it was a little bit lighter than what you wanted or needed. So then maybe by, late afternoon, you're kind of hungry. And then maybe you decided to eat, cookies at work, but then you ended up eating like more than you planned on, right? Because you just like were sitting near the cookies and you just kept kind of eating them. Maybe you were distracted, got a stressful email, right? So kind of looking at those days, and then just each day, right? Like whether, like not judging whether it's good or bad, just this is what happened leading up to my day. If that feels a little too controlled for you, then I would just back off and say, okay, I want to just let go of judgments and just eat food for a little while and see what happens. You'd be surprised at how challenging it can be to just eat food and not beat yourself up about it, right? I'm always amazed. Like, we have to feed ourselves multiple times a day, every day, and it is so hard. It's hard to get good like nutrition in. It's hard to devote the time and the energy. It does require making yourself a priority and spending either time or money to get quality food in our bodies. And then we have so much in our brains about like all of the little choices that come into play when we're eating food. So basically, I'm saying there are a lot of things you can do, but the first step is letting go of judgment. And at least that's been my experience, letting go of judgment and being open-minded and just seeing what happens when we eat food. So, some of you are going to be a little more, are going to struggle with that a little more than others. For some people, you've already been eating in a way that's kind of, a lot of times it's like the F-its, right? Like, forget it, I'm just going to eat all the things. And again, intuitive eating isn't just eating whatever you want. It is giving yourself permission to eat, unconditional permission to eat, but it's also honoring your body. So maybe you've been eating just in a way that's like really kind of lax, like whatever I want, whenever I want it. And maybe now that's starting to feel like that doesn't feel good to just eat. Maybe you're eating like 3 Snicker bars every day. I don't know, whatever it is. So, that type of eating can be fun, right? To a point. But when it starts to play into our bodies not feeling well, then there are things we can do to start to shift that. But I don't recommend ever restricting. I always kind of recommend exploring and, adding in more nutrition and seeing how that feels versus restricting and taking away. The only time that I really recommend doing that is under the care of a doctor for a short-term healing protocol, if you're in a place where it's not going to feel too triggering. So that's really the important thing, is like, am I in a place where I can do this? And is there a good reason for this? So for me personally, I have an autoimmune condition. I have some gut health issues, and my pain recently had been increasing and increasing and increasing. So I uh, somebody just came in. I told you my house gets really busy when I'm on here. Anyway, so I had been having more and more pain, and I hadn't felt like I was in a place where I wanted to do any type of restricting for quite a while. I wanted to really be flexible in my eating. And now I'm feeling like, okay, I really want my body to feel good, and I don't want to be having this pain. So I am doing a short-term healing protocol myself right now. I actually had to examine whether I felt like I could do that kind of publicly. When I do these, I do tend to lose weight. And I didn't want, all my people kind of going, well, wait a minute, you're doing a diet, right? Because that's not the purpose of what I'm doing. The purpose is to feel well. And within just 2 days of shifting some of the foods that I was eating, my pain dramatically decreased. So, how does that work in the framework of intuitive eating? Being a little vulnerable talking about myself here, but basically how it works is that I continue to check in with myself. Is this worth it? Is this feeling too restrictive? I did actually have the short-term healing protocol, and I did actually already loosen it up. I already, like they had restrictions on how much protein, and I don't think that eating, meat is causing my problem because well, have evidence that it's not. And I eat super clean. I eat, grass-fed beef from Cuckoo Land Farms, local farm, and I eat pasture-raised chickens from Croker's Crossing. So I don't feel that those are contributing to my pain. And actually, I have evidence of that, given that my pain went away when I kind of am avoiding some of these other foods. So I decided to go ahead and do it, but every day I'm examining, like, is this still worth it? And what are some of the ways I can liberalize this and see if it is working or not? And there are certain food groups that I suspect are causing problems for me. I added back in, some honey and a few other things, and that seems to be fine. But, I'm going to continue to see if my pain continues to be low and gradually continue to make this more and more flexible. So, and again, I'm doing it at a period where I feel solid in my intuitive eating work. I don't feel too triggered by this. And, I just have a real open dialogue with myself, and I really am looking at it from an experimental mindset. Is this working? Is this helping? What are the foods that are potentially causing me pain? Because I don't like to be in pain. It really, it's not fun to be in pain, but also it reduces my energy for this work, and my energy for spending time with my family and being in nature. So for me, eating foods that cause me pain are not really worthwhile. So, I'm really sensitive to inflammation. So I don't do well with processed foods, and I have to avoid gluten and eggs and a few other things. Um, but within that framework, I don't eat them because they're not worth it to me because of pain. But there are other things that are not, awesome for me, like a gluten-free cupcake, right? Is still a cupcake. But there are times in my life where it's totally 100% worth it. Right now I eat chocolate, I eat things that, don't impact my health the same way that say a Costco hot dog would. So anyway, that's kind of my personal where I'm at right now and how I blend eating for health, right, or for nourishment and vitality and wellness, and incorporating intuitive eating principles. So really getting clear on what makes me feel well and what is important to me in terms of satisfaction. So balancing, again, going back to balancing those two things. All right, so I feel like I ended up talking a lot more about the big picture than I planned to, and a little bit more about my own personal journey. But I hope this was helpful in getting a sense of whether intuitive eating is something that you're interested in, and just some easy baby steps to take, really examining your thoughts around why a food is something you think you shouldn't eat, or letting go of shaming yourself around food. So studies have actually shown that shame around food actually contributes to over or having episodes of like binge eating, right? And or eating in a way that feels out of control. And it contributes to other health issues as well. It contributes to people not getting the health care that they need. So shame is never helpful, and it does not lead to anyone making health improvements. So time to let go of the shame and adding in this piece of, we do that by letting go of judgment as well. And what we replace that with is curiosity. and a growth mindset and experimenting. So go out and experiment. I'd love to hear how any of these experiments went for you, and I hope you found this video helpful. Have a great afternoon.